Parliament is back, and boy did it come back with a bang. In the clip I'm about to show you, the Home Secretary Yvette absolutely savages the former Home Secretary James Cleverly. In her opening remarks, she clearly points out that the riots that we saw a few weeks ago are not protests, and people that are still calling them protests or anti-immigration protests should hang their heads in shame. They were literally riots by right-wing thugs.
So let us be very clear, those violent and criminal attacks were not protests, they were not about grievance, they were thuggery, racism and crime. Plenty of people across the country have strong views about crime, about policing, about immigration, asylum, the NHS and more, but they don't pick up bricks and throw them at the police. They don't loot shops or attack places of worship, and they don't set buildings alight knowing that other human beings are inside. There's lots to debate on all kinds of policy issues, but no one should make excuses for violence or thuggery that risks public safety. This was brazen criminality perpetrated in many cases by those with existing criminal convictions. The Prime Minister and I made clear that criminals would pay the price for their violence, and we meant it.
She goes on to say that a few things that are outlining to do in the coming weeks and getting new legislations through, but it was James Cleverly's response that was in very poor taste, and it was rightly pointed out that it was clear he's just pitching for the leader's job. He wants to appeal to the members, so I do wonder if a little part of him died inside when someone who he proudly says that he works extensively with ethnic minority groups tries to use someone taking the knee in support of Black Lives Matter as a stick to beat them with. Cooper then goes on to basically say that he did an absolutely awful job as Home Secretary, and I think she actually tried to give him a little bit of advice. Forge your own path and don't follow in the footsteps of your predecessors, who were completely racist and xenophobic. But I doubt he'll listen.
So does the Home Secretary now see that the comments made by one of her own ministers at the time of the riots, seemingly making excuses for armed thugs intimidating the media, undermines the government's credibility, reinforces the accusations of bias, and puts people, including police officers, at increased risk? And does she now also recognise that the Labour leadership kneeling in the immediate aftermath of the Black Lives Matter disorder, when violent protesters attacked police officers, looks like her party takes some forms of violence less seriously than other forms of violence? And does she accept that any perception whatsoever of treating the same crimes differently based on the race, religion or community of the perpetrators increases tension rather than reduces it? And does she accept that at times of heightened tension, government ministers must be and must seem to be even-handed and demand even-handedness of others? Does she also recognise that the delay in holding a COBRA meeting until almost a week after these events started was a mistake? That it created a vacuum and delayed the actions which could have brought this disorder to an end more quickly when I was on her side of the House, to ensure that the police are able to take firm action and clamp down on crime with all the force that the law allows, without the fear of being strung up for years in endless investigations. In government, we recruited 20,000 new police officers, but they will be hampered in their work if they do not feel supported by the government when they take the firm action needed to keep the people of this country safe. Violence has absolutely no place on our streets. Anyone who engages in violent disorder or commits violent crimes must face the full force of the law, no matter who they are.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, look, I welcome, obviously, the Shadow Home Secretary's words of support for the Southport families and his reassertion that there can be no excuse for violent disorder. But I have to say, the rest of his response sounded an awful lot more like a pitch to Tory party members in the middle of a leadership election than it did a serious response to the scale of the disorder that we saw and the need for a serious policing response. So he asked the issue around the strategic reserve. He asked about the standing army. We set up the strategic reserve. It was in place for the second weekend, and we had thousands of police officers who were ready, not the old arrangements that he used to, that we inherited from him, where mutual aid had to be on call and had to be stood up in a rush when it was called for, but we actually got the police public order officers ready and deployed at strategic locations around the country so that they could move fast in order to be able to be there when they were needed. And this really goes to the heart of the problems that we inherited from the Home Secretary, the Shadow Home Secretary, and from my predecessor. The central coordination that he had left in place was far too weak. The chief officers who were involved in trying to get mutual aid in place, trying to coordinate intelligence, had very weak infrastructure, very weak systems in place. They hadn't been supported over very, very many years. In fact, some of his predecessors had tried to get rid of a lot of the work of the National Policing Coordination Centre. So our approach instead is to say that we should strengthen it. We believe that we should strengthen that coordination and we should strengthen the central coordination. We will work with the police to do so, and that is why I have asked the Inspectorate to operate. Secondly, he refers the issues around, seriously, on social media, the action against social media. His party delayed the Online Safety Act for years, year after year. My colleague, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology, has already been working closely to put more pressure onto the social media companies, but his party did nothing for years. It is far too late for them to try and call for action. The policing use of force review is important and will continue. But I have to say to him finally, this issue about he is playing all these games, undermining the credibility of the police, trying to blame the Prime Minister for something that happened 4 years ago. He's somehow responsible for the violent disorder on our streets this summer, and also undermining the credibility of police officers who take an oath. Each individual officer takes an oath to operate without fear or favour. And I would just remind him, his predecessor, the previous Home Secretary, was the one who first tried to undermine and attack the credibility of the police in the run-up to Armistice Day, and that is why we then ended up with a bunch of thugs trying to get to the cenotaph to disrupt the service and launching violent attacks on the police. That's the only reason he got the job of Home Secretary in the first place, because everyone condemned his predecessor for her behaviour. I'm so sorry that he's decided in a leadership election to follow her example rather than something that I really thought he was better than.
Yvette Cooper is very good at being brutally honest with her members in Parliament, and you can see her doing just that in the video that's on screen now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.